Hi. Today I'm going to talk about studying versus solving environmental problems. First, the focus of this effort is going to be at the land-sea interface, and there are many reasons for that. But most importantly, the regions of very strong gradients and regions of major human impacts, sort of the battlefield for environmental change that's occurring now and into the future. A couple little factoids about the coastal zone. If you count the plus or minus 200 meters of sea level, it's about a fifth of the Earth's surface, but almost half, or greater than half of the human population resides in this narrow fringe along the edge of the coast. 70% of the megacities are in the coastal zone, and a startling fact is that a large dam, a mega dam, greater than 50 feet high, is built every day on average for the last 100 years, and there are literally 900 dams under construction as we speak. About 90% of global fisheries is in the coastal zone, feeding about 1 billion people that rely on the protein from these fisheries. About a quarter of the global biological productivity, and that's because of these ecosystems in the coastal zone, like mangroves and salt marshes and seagrasses and kelp beds, coral reefs in particular. Coastal zone processes have strong gradients and strong variability, major sediment and nutrient sinks from runoff from the land, and intense biogeochemical cycling. In addition, the intensified agriculture and animal production and associated runoff from that development pressure and from the cities themselves mean that the coastal zone is an area that receives an incredible amount of the world's pollution. So we've entered this new phase, geologic phase, that some people have coined the Anthropocene, which has taken over from the Holocene, where the human impacts now dominate the globe. And it's just a nighttime satellite to show the human footprint in terms of just the light emissions. But it's the stuff you can't see on this satellite photo. It's the biogeochemical cycling that's been altered. It's the ocean currents that have been changed, the sea level, rates of sea level rise, the melting of the ice caps. These processes now are being completely dominated by human activity. Now I'm going to just highlight some features in three large geographic zones of the globe. The polar zone, which is where climate change impacts are the most profound, where the sea ice melting and changes in food webs and productivity are being dramatically altered. These areas are very sensitive to climate change, not just the melting of the sea ice, but the glaciers and the tundra that are permafrost that are melting. We do a lot of oil and gas exploration. There's a sort of a global toxicant flow that the toxicants that are produced in temperate tropical areas settle into the Arctic and Antarctic regions primarily. We have simple food webs that lead to whale production through phytoplankton and krill. Lots of strong seasonality, of course, with the melting of the sea ice, and then open water and nutrient uptake by spring bloom of plankton and under ice communities. Lots of methane production. So it's a biologically active part of the world, but only in very short seasons, which are now dramatically changing. In the temperate area, we've been struggling with eutrophication for the last couple hundred years, and it's due to the intensive land use and the human footprint, and the largest civilizations have been in the temperate areas, and so we've got nutrients from fossil fuel burning, intensified agriculture, manure and fertilizer running off into the coastal zone. We get, as a result, we've also drained the wetlands and dammed the rivers. So we get lots of chain alterations, and this nutrient-enhanced runoff lead to algal blooms and low oxygen, hypoxia, anoxia, loss of seagrasses, loss of salt marshes. And so these naturally productive coastal ecosystems with plankton and seagrass and marsh are being altered due to this flood of nutrients across this long extended salinity, fairly permanent salinity gradient. In the tropics, it's very different because the salinity is very pulsed. The runoff tends to, tropics seasonality is wet dry as opposed to hot and cold. And these salinity gradients are pulsed, and in the wet season you get this cocktail of fresh water and nutrients and sediments and toxicants that come spilling into the coastal zone. And there's lots of going on in these catchments or watersheds in the tropics. It's an area of rapid expanded human development with deforestation, fertilization, grazing lands, aquaculture, and slash and burn agriculture. We've got oligotrophic, low nutrient, natural ecosystems. The mangroves, corals, and tropical seagrasses generally have low nutrients, so they're very sensitive to these pulses of nutrients and sediments that come in occasionally. So we've got these issues that transcend all the coastal areas of the world, and they call upon us as scientists to be involved in studying and then hopefully solving these problems. So let me talk about studying these problems first of all. When you study a scientific problem, at the core of that is the scientific rigor that goes into the investigation process and the total commitment of the scientist to get the appropriate data, analyze it, and interpret it properly. We go through a cycle of writing proposals to fund the research, to lead to the publications that then goes back to proposing for more funding. And then all of this is mediated through peer review in the scientific community. The proposal, the research, and the publication is vetted through the scientific process. And the things that the studying problems you've got is this constant yearning for the truth, this developing new methodologies and new technologies to study these problems and to embrace and understand this complexity. So these are the things that go into successful studying of environmental problems. The contrast to that is solving environmental problems, and at the core of that isn't the scientific rigor, it's the shared vision that's co-developed with the stakeholders, and that participation of a variety of stakeholders organized to deal with this, to try to achieve this shared vision. The three elements that go into solving problems are the management community, the research community, the applied research, and the monitoring. And these both have require leadership in the scientific community to instill good applied research, leadership in the NGO and government agencies that are involved in the monitoring, and leadership in the government to do effective resource management. And then ultimately the broader community of stakeholders are the ones that are responsible for vetting those research, management, monitoring priorities, so that well informed through a variety of communication mechanisms can lead to effective actions. So this is creating a bit of a dichotomy between solving versus studying environmental problems. To study problems, we have to be dispassionate, objective. To solve problems, you have to say, I care about Chesapeake Bay, or I care about this river. To study problems, you have to embrace the complexity. To solve problems, you have to simplify it, to make it manageable, to put it into terms that people can understand and into actions that people can get behind. To study problems, you have to publish and get funding via the peer review, that scientific community. To solve problems, your publishing and funding isn't directed towards the peer scientists, but to the stakeholders. To study the environmental problems, you have to get it right, no matter how many drafts it takes, no matter how many iterations. To solve problems, you have the dilemma of having windows of opportunity in which you need to get it done, and it might only be necessary to get it 90% right to be able to solve problems, as opposed to 99% for studying problems. Well, this dilemma is almost akin to a right brain, left brain. You have two hemispheres of the brain, one rational and one artistic, and yet we work effectively with both hemispheres, just like we can work effectively to study and solve problems, just like the past year's quadrant that we've talked about previously. And that is through, in the brain, the corpus callosum. That's those neural connections between the two hemispheres. Einstein, by the way, had a very large, not a very large, exceptionally large brain, but he had exceptionally large corpus callosum, the connections between the two hemispheres. And that's what we need to study and solve environmental problems. Some of the examples of scientists who have been able to do this and effectively communicate the results can really change the world. I mean, they can really rock the world. And the Copernican revolution started in 1543 upon the publication of his treatise about how the Earth circled the sun, not vice versa, was revolutionary. Nobody died in this revolution, but people really fundamentally rocked their world. It changed the way everyone thought about the place of Earth in the solar system. Galileo, similarly with the laws of gravity, and of course Galileo was under house arrest for espousing the Copernican philosophy. Kepler with the motions of planets, and then Newton with his laws of thermodynamics, and Linnaeus, who investigated all the weird and amazing creatures that were being brought back from expeditions to the nether parts of the world that hadn't previously been explored. Lavoisier, the Frenchman who invented chemistry, debunked the Philistine theory, and then got his head chopped off in the French Revolution. Charles Lyell, the geologist who showed the Earth was not 6,000 years old, but much more ancient, and his famous student Darwin, who came up with the theory of natural selection. Albert Einstein with his famous E equals MC squared, and led to the physics revolution and atomic power and atomic bombs. Watson and Crick, the two scientists who collaborated in 1953 to publish the structure of DNA, which led to the molecular biology revolution and biomedical revolution that's taken place. And so these dead white men, as I call them, interestingly, women on this, and this is because I used a citation frequency to choose these individuals, and women just didn't have access to education, or they had so much historical injustice in their abilities to contribute. I mean, there are exceptions like Marie Curie and Rosalind Franklin and all, but generally they didn't get the accolades or the attention the men did. That's changing, I suspect that the face in the missing face, the world there for sustainability revolution will be not one of these dead white men, but somebody else. And so what society needed to know is, where we came from, what we're made of, and how we relate to the world. And now it needs to know how we can live sustainably on this planet. So there'll be, I predict, somebody will lead us into the sustainability revolution in this 50-year period. So all of this can be found in a paper I wrote that's available as a reading material, Environmental Problem Solving in Coastal Ecosystems, a Paradigm Shift to Sustainability.